Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 8th Annual Education Day and our 4th virtual edition of the OneAbility Education Day. We're going to provide you with some really great information today, supporting recreation leaders, educators, and sport leaders with tools around how we can really support each other to learn more about disability inclusion and to create opportunities across the sports system for folks to be involved, including all of their abilities. I'm Andrea Carey, and I'm the Executive Director on a part-time basis of OneAbility Foundation, and really grateful to be here with you today. And we have a great lineup of speakers for you. We will begin by inviting Elder Alec Nelson to do an opening for us, and then we will move into our program for the day. We do have 2 ASL interpreters joining us today, so they should be pinned on your screen. If you aren't able to see them, please let us know so that we can make some adjustments to how those are showing up for you. They will be here throughout. We also have closed captioning enabled, so that should support you as well. And let us know if you're having any tech issues. Either myself or Sierra Roth that's on the session can help support those throughout today. So I would like to invite Elder Alec Nelson to join us. I've had the really incredible gift of knowing Alec for several years. Alec is an elder from Muskamaket Danuk First Nation in Kinkham Village, and he resides in Victoria and is deeply entrenched in his traditions and culture. Alec spent 7 years at the St. Michael's Residential School in Alert Bay. As a graduate of UVic from the same program that I did my undergrad in as well, so love that we share that. He's a senior advisor and elder for the Indigenous Sport, Physical Activity and Recreation Council. And one of his greatest achievements was hosting the 1997 North American Indigenous Games in Victoria. And just this past summer, Alec was inducted into the North American Indigenous Games Hall of Fame. And he's also in the BC Sport Hall of Fame and the Greater Victoria Sport Hall of Fame. So super grateful to have you join us today, Alec. And thank you so much for being here. And over to you to open us in a good way.
Hey, thank you, Andrea. Thank you for the wonderful introductions and the sentiments that accompany that. Nukom Okwilakame, Deno. My traditional name is Okwilakame. And I just wanted to make a quick reference to its description. Okwilakame means like our notion of when you look into the clouds, you look into the water, you look into the cliffs, you look into the forests. Sometimes you see the appearance of individuals, people, figures embedded in those that I mentioned, and that's where I think to myself, that's what we do here. We appear in front of each other, and sometimes we don't know whether we're appearing, but we, I guess, spiritually know that we are, and that's where the Tamet comes in. That's my face that I look into, and I just see that my eyes becomes the interpreter of that face. So with that, I needed to help you understand that the name. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the Lakwanan people and the Songhees people for their territories. And, you know, my wife and I and our family's been living here for the past 50 years. So we're well entrenched into the community. And we look forward to continued existence here, of course. And whenever we go home, we try to take the time to get home. And there again, I know my personal pride in home territories is there, as much like yours in many ways. So I just, you know, I was sort of reading the OneAbility description and the feeling that came with this. And I say to myself, wow, you know, you are working for humanity in its own right. you're working for humanity. And I think about what's happening in the Middle East right now, and by golly, that word needs to be spread to those areas that are in need of that spirit that you have. And so I just want to congratulate you on the positions that you have and how you hold them here. And so I just wanted to say thank you so much for the invitation to come into your big house, come and be a part of your family. And we're sharing the fire right now within our big house with you. And so I look forward to that. And Andrea, I just want to also state that I've got another function that I'm been involved in with the Holiton Children and Family Services. And they had named a room out there, and they asked for my attendance to that. So I'm going out there at 12 o'clock to, or just before 12, to go and attend to their function. But there again, the ability, and I just love this, the ability to do that is because you guys exist. Thank you. Okay. Okay, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Alec. You hold such a special place in my heart, and I'm so grateful each time we get to have time together. And you always share such beautiful ways of us being in community together. And I'm just so incredibly grateful you could join us today. So thank you, and we wish you well with your next piece this morning, because that sounds like a pretty incredible opportunity to be involved in, I know, something that's been near and dear to your heart with Surrounded by Cedar. So yeah, they're lucky to have you, as we this morning. So thank you so much. And we'll look forward to continuing our work together.
Yeah, Kesla.
So folks, we're going to continue on with our journey today and move towards inviting our speakers in. So I'm going to share with you just an acknowledgement, first of all, of our incredible relationship with the Victoria Foundation. The Victoria Foundation has been involved with us pretty much since we started OneAbility back in 2015. And we just wanted to highlight the vital signs report that they just published in October. There's some really amazing data points in here that can really support the work that we're doing across the Greater Victoria community. And they've been such an incredible supporter of ours, and so always looking for ways we can continue to support them. So in the chat, we're putting the link to Vital Signs today. I'm going to invite you to have a flip through that document, and if you'd like a hard copy, let us know. And there is a whole feature on sport and recreation in there, which at various points they've really highlighted the work of OneAbility. This year's edition highlights some of the work of Pisces and some of the data points that Kids Sport Victoria has been collecting around some of the gaps in our community in the sport and recreation realm. I also, we've already mentioned the ASL interpreters, but I know a few folks joined late, so we have 2 interpreters joining us today that will be pinned on the screen throughout the session. And we also have transcriptions enabled, so hopefully those support folks to engage in the session in ways that will work for each of you. Let us know if you need anything else. And we just had the beautiful words of Alec Nelson. So our agenda today is our welcoming.
Sorry, Andrea.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I guess in my haste, I wanted to sing a quick song
Oh yeah,
to
please.
accompany my introductions there. And earlier we tried to use the rattle, we tried to use the drum, and it doesn't quite come through in in its proper way. But I guess it's meant to be. And so I wanted to quickly sing that song and talk to the spirit of that song.
Okay.
And once again, it's a song that it comes with a lot of spirit, and it comes with being at peace, and comes with I guess the magic of the world. And so with that, I'll sing the song right now very quickly.
Yes, please.
Wa 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 ye wa ye hey ya. Wa ho wa ye wa ye hey ya. Wa ha, ha, ye, hey, hey, ya. Wah, ha, wah, ha, wah, hey, ya. Wah, wah, tus, wah, ye, hey, ya. Wah, wah, tus, wah, ye, hey, ya. Ya, nis, tuan, kans, kwele, ye, na, wahala, kwa, ye. Wah, 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 hey, ya. Yeah, the spirit of the song, it makes a reference to water and what water does for all our people. And in this case, it sprinkles us with a lot of healing and love. And so with that, Bela Kesla, thank you for listening to the song. And I hold my hands up to my grandfather for that particular song. Away. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everybody.
Beautiful. Thank you, Alec. Thank you again for opening us in such a beautiful way this morning and for sharing that learning with us. And I feel like water is such an important part of our lives and one that we probably undervalue. And so appreciate you sharing that with us. Okay, folks, we're gonna move into our agenda. So I want to begin by just also acknowledging our board of directors. And so on the call today, we have Karina Kennisberg. And Karina, I don't know if you want to just pop on and say a quick hello. I'll walk through the rest of our board of directors while you decide if that works for you. But we are year 2 as an actual charity and foundation and have been incredibly grateful for the guidance of our board of directors, kind of our founding board of directors, as it were. And so Karina's been our board chair for these 2 years. And we also have Tanel Boltz, Alana Verville, Mike Waters as other board of directors. And we had Gail Hamamoto until she got an incredible new opportunity with Special Olympics Canada, and she's had to step back. So we're actually just in a recruitment process for our board of directors. So if you or someone you know would be interested in that role, please let Karina or I know, because we are actively recruiting for our AGM at the end of January.
Thanks, Andrea. Yes, just welcome everybody. Thank you so much for that introduction and really beautiful welcoming, Alex. I really appreciate you being here, as well as everybody who has taken the time to join us for our annual Education Day. It's great to see the many faces and names on the list, and really inspired by the great work of the presenters that we're going to see today. So big thanks also to the OneAbility team, Andrea and Sierra and Sam and Heather, who do a lot of the work behind the scenes, as well as the partners within OneAbility and our ASL interpreters for today. So thank you so much for having me and for joining us for Education Day.
Awesome. Thanks, Karina. Thanks for that welcome. And we're grateful for all of your volunteerism and support as we've gotten this new evolution of OneAbility going over these last 2 years. All right, folks, we're going to move into our first presenter. So today we have the Stedward Center joining us, and we have Geneva Coulter and Sierra Roth from the Stedward Center talking about a program called Becoming Para-Ready. And Becoming Para-Ready was a resource developed by the Stedward Center and then evolved into an actual training program in partnership with the National Parasport Collective and Ability Center in Whitby, Ontario over this last kind of year and a half. And we see it as an incredible learning opportunity, and so wanted to showcase it today as part of these promising practices. And so I'm going to invite Geneva and Sierra in to present on that. And looking forward to hearing more about this great program. Thank you both so much for being here and for all of the incredible work that you're doing.
I'm just going to share my screen. Perfect. Okay, yeah, so we're just gonna get started. We'll be talking about becoming para-ready. So I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that the Stedward Center is on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence this vibrant community. So to get started, Sierra and I will just do a little bit of an intro about ourselves, just kind of who we are and what we do at the Stedward Center. So yeah, my name is Shiva Coulter. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Partnerships and Parasport Development Coordinator at the Stedward Center. In terms of education, I have a bachelor's of kinesiology with a major in adapted physical activity from the University of Alberta.
And I am Sierra, also running tech, so I'm looking at multiple screens right now. But I use she, her pronouns and am the Parasport Initiatives Assistant at the Stedward Center. And I also have a bachelor's degree in kinesiology from the U of A and hold many certifications, including certified personal trainer with CSEP. So we have a video that we would like to start off with. It's approximately 7 minutes, and a video outlines a little bit of the history of the Stedward Center and our namesake, Dr. Bob Stedward.
You hear that?
No, I would go switch it over to YouTube.
Okay.
Still no sound. I think if you have to reshare, Geneva.
Okay.
And just make sure sound is clicked on.
Yeah, just make sure you click the share sound function when you share the screen.
I think we're good now.
The Stedward Center for Physical and Personal Achievement welcomes nearly 1,000 adults, youth, and children experiencing disability each year. The Faculty of Kinesiology, Sport, and Recreation within the University of Alberta inspires research, education, and collaboration. Founded in 1978 by Dr. Robert Stedward.
When people would ask me what I do, I would always tell them that I work at the University of Alberta, one of the greatest universities in the world. Back in 1964, the person who made a big difference in my life in those early years was the first dean of the faculty, Maury Van Vliet. Maybe he saw something that I didn't see within myself. When we hosted the first National Wheelchair Games for Canada here on this campus, right outside these doors in the old track area. And it was Maury who chaired those games, and it was him that grabbed me and said, "You're going to help me organize and run these games." And they can compete in more than sport now. They can compete for a place in an educational environment. They can compete in for jobs. I just felt right away that it was this was the place to make a difference. My goals, my dreams, my drive, my purpose for being became one of trying to change what was to what could be. It starts at home, but can't end there. And that's why I took the leap of faith to help lead those organizations with fabulous people. I took on the challenge of putting together a new world body called the International Paralympic Committee in about 1980. I put together a document which brought about 40 countries together. We'd put forth 23 resolutions Every one of them passed either unanimously or just about unanimously, and that helped to create the International Paralympic Committee in 1989. Had to be a sports structure, not a medical structure, had to be run by the nations of the world. We had to have athletes on the board. We had to have a functional classification. So I got elected as the founding president, and then my biggest challenge after that was to make friends with the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, so I could bring those two organizations together. And that took 12 years of sweat, blood, and tears. But we did it. In 2000, when we signed the MOU and we're in Sydney, Australia, kids would run across the street to get their autograph and ask what sport they played, not what their disability was. We had 42 or 43 nations when I started in '89 as president, and when I left 12 years later, we had 175 countries as full members of the movement. And now today, we're the second largest sporting movement in the world. You always talk about the importance of doing something at home. So I felt that it was really important to do my very best to help people locally. And again, there were so many people living with a disability in Edmonton that were not getting the coaching, the facilities, the equipment to participate in sport and recreation. You know, other countries have emulated what we do here and have built centers based on what we have done here over the last 45 years, which is phenomenal. It's truly overwhelming. You have no idea the humility that it builds in a person. You know, why me? When it wasn't me, it was my family that sacrificed so much while I was away building and they were at home, whether it's being appointed a companion of the Order of Canada or whether it's receiving the Olympic Order or any of those others. It's because they're recognizing what a lot of people have given to ensure that people with disability have their rightful place in the community and in society. So every person that sees that companion of the Order of Canada or the Alberta Order of Excellence or whatever have, they can touch and say, I was part of that. And with a leader, you've got to make sure that you understand what respect, trust, and responsibility is all about. Then top that by saying, and you want to succeed. Do you know what the recipe is for success? The ingredients are the same for everyone, but it's how they use those ingredients, which is skill, commitment, sacrifice, and attitude. I mean, I'm very proud of the center. My name with it is fine, but to me it symbolizes the outstanding accomplishments and loyalty and hard work that so many people have committed to make it what it is today. I mean, all you need to do, look at the leadership we have in Dr. Jen Leo. I mean, look what she has been doing and others that have gone before her. And as I see where we're at in the world today, I still feel we have a long way to go.
Perfect. Thanks, Geneva. So we just wanted to show that video to celebrate the 45 years of the Studward Center. Both Geneva and I will talk a little bit about the importance of the Stedward both in both of our lives. But as the video stated, we are an adapted physical activity, rec, and para sports center located at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. And we run a variety of programming. So we have the children's program called Free to Be Me, adult fitness and rec, athlete development for para sports. And we're involved with a lot of different education initiatives, specifically Becoming Para Ready, which is what we're going to talk about today. And then athletes to coaches and inclusive play leadership module through Jumpstart.
Okay, so me and Sierra have kind of already introduced ourselves, but we kind of wanted to actually make sure that we kind of got into the nitty gritty of why we're actually here, why we're involved with Stedward, and why we've just ended up here generally. So currently I am the equipment manager and an assistant coach with the Canadian Women's Para Hockey team. I formerly played on the national team. I've retired in 2018. And I've lived with a disability for about the last 20 years. And so from that, I've used a variety of mobility devices, specifically crutches, a wheelchair, a cane, on and off. At this point in my life, I am primarily ambulatory, using a cane kind of as needed, just kind of taking it day by day. So I was introduced to the Stedward Center when I was 8 years old. I started going to one-on-one programs and then transitioned into group programs for the social environment. Through the Stedward Center, my family was introduced to other parasport organizations in Edmonton, Alberta, largely. Paralympic Sports Association here in Edmonton was one of them. Sledge hockey or para hockey was the first sport that I really took a big liking to. I started that when I was 11. And while Stedward didn't run a para hockey program, most of the other programs that I was doing at the time were done through Stedward. I did their strength and conditioning programs when I was training to get onto the national team and training when I was on the team. And I did their swimming programs as cross training and just when I couldn't actually get ice to get the activity that I needed during the summer. Everything I did with Stedward was really crucial to my success in hockey, even though it didn't, I wasn't actually on the ice with Stedward, but that didn't actually matter because there was all these other aspects that were making that difference. From actually being a participant with Stedward, I've also volunteered through the years, and I've worked in a couple different roles. And even though I've only been in this role with Stedward for the last year and a half, I've been involved and tied to the Stedward Center for the last 15 years.
Perfect. So similar to Geneva, I've been involved with the Stedward in a variety of different amplitudes here. So I acquired a disability at the age of 16 during a motocross accident, which left me with a spinal cord injury in a very small town in Alberta. So I was first introduced to the Stedward during some outpatient appointments with some physios, and later was reintroduced when I attended the University of Alberta. So through the help of the Stedward Center, along with various other disability organizations in and around the area, I was introduced to some para sports that reignited my passion for physical activity that I had growing up. So as a participant, I first started in programs like FES, which is a functional electrical stimulation bike, and then also started in some athletics at the Stedward as an athlete. And then I transitioned into some other sports, but the Stedward really, started me off in that journey of kind of showing me what was possible. So then I transitioned into rowing with the Next Gen Rowing program with Rowing Canada through the U of A Rowing Club. And that's kind of when I quickly learned that, whatever kind of sports I wanted to get involved in, there would be some support with the Stedward Center also having the gym there right on campus where I was going to school. I was also volunteering my time there. So I supported the PALS program, the physical activity led by students program at the Stedward. which quickly turned into me volunteering in other programs. And then I was a coach for the athletes and training program, and later into a youth portfolio, and now into parasport initiatives. So I've been super fortunate to be able to explore all these different areas. I also have been exploring the outdoor rec opportunities in adaptive mountain biking. So you'll find me coaching a lot with various organizations where I mainly focus on women with disabilities and finding meaningful ways for them to engage in sport and mountain biking. So all of these opportunities only sparked because of my involvement with the Stedward Center and really reigniting that passion to get back to movement and being back outside. So it's been a whole 10 years of being shown kind of the different options that I have back into physical activity.
Okay, so for this session, talking about becoming para-ready, just kind of our agenda for what this looks like is we'll talk about what becoming para-ready is and how it was created as an idea, and then I'll get into the three main components of the resource.
So Becoming Para-Ready was originally developed in collaboration with the athletics community in Alberta, and it was developed as an introductory guide that could provide coaches and club administrators with knowledge, confidence, and tools to be more proactive or ready to do inclusion better rather than reactive. So while the integration of people experiencing disability has occurred, research has shown that it was not always been successful at the grassroots level. And Geneva and I have many examples of this. Clubs and coaches are not confident and prepared to support athletes experiencing disability in their clubs. So this guide introduces them to the ways integration can be implemented. The original resource was developed with and for the sport of athletics. However, the 10 P's checklist can be used for any sport club that wants to learn how to make programs more inclusive. The cool thing about this version was Athletics Canada created their own sportified version. So you can see on this slide, the Becoming Para-Ready resource on the right. And this was a document that focused more on the technical aspects of para-athletics, specifically classification rules, looking back at the history of para-athletics, which brought us to Becoming Para-Ready 2.0.
Yeah. So this updated version has been developed to be more user-friendly, to reach a broader audience, and to be used across any sport. The three main categories, perspective, planning, and programming, can be viewed as steps on your journey towards building an environment that is inclusive to athletes experiencing disability. With BPR 2.0, we've had other sport organizations, not just athletics, that basically are moving towards creation of their own sportified documents. Some examples of those organizations are Nordic Canada, Alpine Canada, and Rowing BC. They're all kind of in that process. So with the image on the slide, we have the actual Becoming Para-Ready 2.0 framework. So like I said, we have the three overarching categories of perspective, planning, and programming. Through perspective, we have philosophy, people, and policy. Under planning, we have place, promotion, pathways, price, and partnerships. And then for the last section, under programming, there is preference, participation, practice, and pedagogy. Through reflection and change, going through these sections becomes cyclical. Getting through all the P's listed on the slide doesn't mean that the process is over. It means taking a look back and considering how you're doing with each P, which ones you're doing well with, which ones do you need to work on, and which ones you feel like you didn't have enough time to focus on the first time around. So with this session, we will focus specifically on philosophy, policy, promotion, partnerships, and preference. So the purpose of this session is to help you challenge your assumptions about disability and understand how becoming para-ready can be used as a starting point to help you become more effective coach practitioners. So after the session, you'll be able to rethink your assumptions about disability, parasport, and society, and reconsider the multiple factors that influence coaching to plan and implement more effective paraprogramming?
So the BPR principles that I'll go through are kind of the overarching concepts that stay relevant when going through becoming pair ready. So the first one, be proactive, planning for inclusion. I find I'm often doing this a lot, even when I am running disability type grouping and programming, but always thinking about how can I be the most prepared and proactive for including everyone that's coming in the doors. Including the voice and choices of people experiencing disability, extremely important. BPR 2.0 is very much including a lot of Geneva's and my experiences in the community, and I feel like that's really helped stretch what this resource can be. 3 is being reflective and purposeful in your actions. So your attitudes and behaviors set the tone for disability inclusion in your context. And I often make sure to tell people, like, really reflect after every session that you're running to see what could have been done better. 4 is noticing that disability is one facet of identity. So remember that there are different intersectionalities that we all carry, and people experiencing disability also have diverse backgrounds, life experiences, and perspectives. And then 5 is knowing that disability is a social construct and impairment is experienced on a continuum. So as you heard from Geneva and I, we are experiencing different disabilities in many different regards. And so knowing that and that we might show up different one day versus another is something to also consider.
Okay, so with that kind of background on becoming pair ready, we'll now get into the actual resource, looking at those 3 main parts. So we will start with perspective. So philosophy is about understanding your views on disability, sport, and society. So that can start with considering some of the following questions. What do you know about disability? Does someone in your family experience disability? A friend? Do you? What do you know about parasport? Have you coached para-athletes before? Have you been a para-athlete? Do you know about parasport organizations in your community? What do you know about different models of disability? Why did you get involved in sport? Why are you still in sport? And how do your biases affect athletes that you coach? So from consideration of your views on disability, sport, and society, you can start to narrow down some of those ideas into your own vision statement and values.
So to start developing your vision and values, we first want to look at the models of disability. It's interesting because the ways in which I experienced disability, I was first introduced to the medical model when I was in rehab. So this puts the responsibility of disability on the individual with no acknowledgement of societal factors. The social model, which is when I came out of the hospital, really recognized that society actually is disabling an individual through the barriers, like inaccessible environments, and the attitudes or beliefs from the community. What I really started to see this shift of another understanding of disability was the social relation understanding. And this is where, we have this undertaking of all these elements of disability that might impact somebody, both functional, as well as the societal barriers that people might be facing. And so sport really showed me this, and I had coaches that really shown the style of the model, and knowing that it wasn't just on me to figure out how to be accommodating in the sport. So there are other models of disability that we won't go into detail on here, but just something to consider when thinking about what your vision and values are within the disability space.
Okay, so on this slide, Sierra and I both have our own vision and values. So we'll both go into a bit of detail talking about these and what they mean for us as coaches, as individuals working in sport, and as people in the broader community. So for me, my vision statement is supporting communities to reach their chosen summits. So kind of just breaking that down is really focusing on autonomy of individuals in making their own choices in what they want to achieve. With summits, I really think a lot about growth and what people are actually working towards. And then kind of tying that into my values as well with supporting is by being an asset and being a team player. Not necessarily not being recognized for everything you do, but knowing that what you do matters. And so thinking about that with some of my other values, community ties in everywhere. I think just that support, connection, and actually just creating that space for individuals to feel supported and wanted is really important. With experience, just really, valuing the differences that everyone has had in their lives and will continue to have, and kind of how that means for how they interact in the world, and kind of how they see it. And then with inclusion, just supporting to create spaces that are welcoming for individuals, but also just recognizing that even if it's an inclusive space, someone still might not want to be there. And so just actually supporting them to be in the communities that they want to be included in.
So I put in the chat, if you would like to share your vision and values, feel free to do that. We always love hearing them. But mine comes from, well, actually recently I started to develop mine because I asked a bunch of youth that I was working with what their why was in sport, and realized that I didn't really define my why until that moment. So mine is to create an impact on people's quality of life so that together we can live a life worth living. So these values and my vision have largely come from my lived experience as both a participant and seeing both the positives and negatives that can occur in adapted physical activity. But I want people to know that they too can be part of physical activity, and they have a right to seek greater opportunities in accessing the outdoors. So with all of these values, this can be achieved, and the community of people experiencing disabilities has been nothing but a wealth of knowledge, welcoming, and accepting to where I was at, and continue to show me the power of our community, and that is why I do what I do every day. So being able to carry that into what I do, and sharing that passion with others.
Okay, and then the other kind of vision that we have on the slide is leaving sport better than we found it. So we hosted a youth summit last year for individuals experiencing disability. Sierra was kind of the lead on it. But coming out of that summit and those discussions, the biggest thing that came out of it was with why we're all still involved in sport is that we want to make it better and leave sport better than we found it. And so that was a really cool one to kind of have as that collective vision for that group. Okay, so next we have policy. So developing policy around inclusion allows for you to keep yourselves accountable and for others to keep you accountable. So a way of doing this is by writing a club inclusion statement. So this is a statement that should be shared publicly, for example, on your website, through social media, in a newsletter. So kind of think about like why actually doing this. It tells your members that the organization is welcoming, accessible, and safe. It keeps everyone in the club accountable. It makes the organization more attractive to community organizations and sponsors. And it can make your organization more attractive for granting opportunities. So in actually creating an inclusion commitment statement, here are some things to include. So defining what inclusion means, laying out key commitments, defining who you are seeking to include, defining how you'll go about things, showing that you are part of the bigger picture, and linking to relevant policies. So on this slide, we have a template for as a starting point for developing a club inclusion statement. We won't go through it in detail, but it can be shared out later. Okay, Sarah, go for it.
So the next one is planning. So we'll look into what that might consider in terms of promotion and partnerships. So Promotion's an interesting one because I see inclusive practices in promotion very different than what some people might think. So one of the things to consider is to really think about how you're promoting and being clear with who you're promoting to and what programs you have, how inclusive your programs are, and who you might be marketing for. So we often see a lot of organizations might share that they can include para-athletes, but they don't necessarily have the equipment, for example, to include everyone. So being very clear in this. For example, if you are a Nordic ski club interested in having para-athletes skiing in the club, but don't have sit skis available to use, maybe refrain from using an image of a sit skier in promotional materials and try and use an image of an ambulatory para-athlete instead. Knowing what you can or can't accommodate at that moment is important. And really thinking about how to be clear when you have, for example, your website and what you can include in there. So things like who are the athletes you are looking to recruit? Where are they? Does your website actually meet those accessibility standards? Does your social media have inclusive language and images that show all types of athletes? And then thinking about what you offer, what equipment you have, and are your staff and volunteers aware of what is being provided?
Okay. So with partnerships, that largely is thinking about the network that you want to create. So considering disability sport organizations, health and rehabilitation centers, and parents and support workers. So kind of part of this is just considering how you're actually going to find the groups that you want to partner with. So if you are a non-para club looking to partner with a disability sport organization, just actually knowing words to search can go a long way, because if you don't know and you can't find anything, then it's hard to partner. And kind of once you find those groups, just thinking about how you'll actually reach out to those other hopeful potential partners. So just kind of recognizing the pros and cons of different modalities like email, phone, being in person, and getting an introduction through mutual contacts. Another consideration is once you have that initial contact is just to actually suggest a meeting to discuss how you can work together. Emails are great to get that basis, but actually having a face-to-face or, a meeting through Zoom goes a long way, just in actually kind of thinking about what's possible. And then another piece is really recognizing what you're looking to get out of that partnership. So as an organization, knowing what you need and what you have to offer. So depending on the type of organization that you are, this may look like sport expertise, training facilities, coaches, funding, or participants. There's other things as well.
Okay, so programming, with programming, we'll go into some details with preference. So preference is largely covers the entire inclusion spectrum, considering if the program that you provide would be able to meet certain points on that spectrum. I strongly believe that if you ask people the question of where they want to be included in the programming, you may be surprised with what their involvement actually looks like to them. So it's interesting because we also run athletes to coaches at the Studward, and the more I ask athletes if they've considered being a coach or being in leadership roles, the more I realize that leadership roles for people with disabilities hasn't always been offered and supported, and we need to figure out ways in which to do that. And so a lot of us know the different levels of inclusion can look like having no modifications, minor, major, and then having segregated spaces, which is often actually very beneficial for a lot of people in, really learning about the sports and rec that they can be involved in. But then really considering working with those athletes or participants to develop and run programs that work for them. So that co-creation and making sure that everything that you do has those people involved in that. and remembering that each athlete has individual preferences. And then really acknowledging the capacity in your organizations. So do you have coaches that focus specifically on para athletes and have that lived experience? And then are para athletes actually integrated into those existing spaces if you are an able-bodied primarily space? So for the key learnings from becoming para ready, we have some successes. So getting a foothold with NSOs that are interested in building a Sportify BPR resource. BPR 2.0 has been that resource that is more readable and has very much been able to integrate more of that lived experience from people like Geneva and I, and has really shown that NSOs are looking for this. And we've seen a lot of other organizations now also starting to take this on. So for example, Alberta Whitewater Association has been super supportive and trying to figure out what makes sense. And then roadblocks, obviously staff capacity, and then figuring out how we trickle down the BPR into the club and the grassroots level.
So kind of looking at BPR as a whole and what we're kind of seeing as the kind of many options right now. And so introduction sessions are something that we have been running throughout the fall, kind of done one a month from September through November. Those sessions have been done virtually, just kind of as a free session, just to actually get the information out there, let people know about the resource. Provides just an overview of the resource and allows time for questions to be asked and conversation to be had. And then workshops, which can be delivered either virtually or in person. So the workshops are digging deeper into the P's of becoming para-ready. With more interaction, the workshops give participants a chance to collaborate with others to learn and reflect about their own sport contexts as well as others. Depending on the workshop, they're often being developed as sport specific. So I ran one for Nordic recently. I'll be running some for swimming, that sort of thing, but it can kind of meet the needs of what people are looking for. And then that other aspect that we've talked about throughout the presentation is sportifying, becoming para-ready. So for sports and organizations to incorporate technical aspects of sport-specific knowledge like classification and competition structure into the document and collaborating with the Stedward Center with us to build out their own Becoming Para-Ready resource that is valuable for them. Okay, and so that kind of gives you that. And that kind of brings us to the end of the presentation. So if people are interested in booking introduction session, a workshop, or looking to Sportify becoming para-ready in your own context, you can reach out to me. My email's on the slide. And yeah, it kind of brings us to the end of that. Anything else? Yeah.
No, thank you all for attending, and I'll pass it over to Andrea.
Thank you both for sharing that. A great program. I know that I've had the opportunity to work with the Becoming Para-Ready resource and training a little bit, and just deeply appreciate how you've brought so many the P's to life to create a really concrete and guided pathway to do better in creating para sport programming. So thank you both for being here and for the great work that the Stedward Center has done in leadership to develop the Becoming Para-Ready resource, and also to help support us to understand it more so that we can bring it to life in our communities. So we'll welcome people to reach out to any of our presenters today if you want more information. So maybe I'll just invite you both to put your contact in the chat so that if folks want to follow up post the session, they've got the opportunity to do so. And in the meantime, we're going to move on to our next presenters, and then we'll come back to you for a panel a little bit later on to invite a little bit more information about sort of how we can use some of these resources and bring them to life. Awesome. Well, we are going to keep moving. We will give you a break after this next presentation. So I'm going to invite the folks from Canucks Autism Network in to share with us about some of the education resources that they are involved in. And they have been great partners of OneAbility since the beginning as well. And we are really grateful to have them here. So I want to welcome Silken, and Silken is, Silken Hanford Paranet. Silken works with the Canucks Autism Network, and for those of folks that aren't familiar with Canucks Autism Network, as I said, they've been a member of OneAbility since our early days, and they are based in Vancouver, but have a team across the province of BC and have created some national resources as well as local resources to support the sport community around inclusion of neurodiversity and autism, folks with autism. So yeah, just really excited to have you here today, Silken, and to welcome you in.
Thank you for such a warm introduction. I'm really excited to be here today, so thank you, everyone. I'm just going to take one moment to share my screen. And of course, this is where it becomes slow. My apologies.
All good. Take a deep breath. It's all good.
There we go.
Thank you.
It's always when you're about to present, it decides to be slow and take its time. But thank you so much. Like the warm introduction said, I'm from the Canucks Autism Network. I'll just briefly introduce myself. My name is Silken. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am located today on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, including the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation. So just a little overview of what we will be covering today. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Canucks Autism Network, I'm going to give the briefest introduction of who we are and what we do. Then we'll get into the meat of the presentation, talking about why we have developed the programming and resources and our methodology behind them. So our vision at CAN is that every autistic individual is understood, accepted, and supported in all community spaces. CAN was founded in 2008. We're just celebrating our 15th anniversary this year by one of the owners of the Canucks hockey team, whose son is actually on the spectrum. They noticed that there wasn't a lot of inclusive opportunities available at that time for autistic individuals and their families. They were oftentimes told that they couldn't participate in programming. So the Aquilinis, since they had the ability to do so, started CAN to provide inclusive opportunities for sport and recreation initially in 2008. And we're really delighted that since then we've been able to grow our offerings to be beyond just sports and rec, as well as social and employment opportunities. A little high overview of what we do at CAN. I think we are most well known for our sports and recreation programs. We have our training programs, which I am the community training coordinator. So any type of community groups, be that sport, first responders, community spaces, medical, school settings who want autism training, I make that happen for them. And then lastly, community engagement. So this looks like autism acceptance games. Cool. Sensory friendly spaces at festivals and so forth. So a little overview of our programming. For recreation leisure, we have swim programs for youth and adult, rowing, hockey, walk clubs, yoga, bouldering. Pilates is a recent offering, and we're really lucky to work with community partners and provincial sports organizations and local teams to provide some of these opportunities that we don't have direct experience with. And that's a big part of our model, is working with folks who have that expertise. In-house, we do swim programs, hockey and skate, and active multi-sport, which are learning like movement and growing those movement-based skills. For a children's program, in person, we run swim and skate, did multi-sport, gymnastics, and hockey. We also do have some virtual programs and family experiences, like going to different opportunities like Easter egg hunts, at light festivals, and so on. So the briefest introduction of what we do and how we're engaging with the community, but we'll move forward on to the meat of the presentation. So I'm just going to give a bit of introduction about our VP of Programs, Training, and Community Engagement. Stephanie joined CAN in 2012 after completing a PhD at Special Education at UBC. She's really the reason why we developed our training programs at CAN. After completing her PhD, she really noticed that there was a lack of opportunity for autistic individuals and generally individuals who have needing support around attention, especially in spaces like sport. There was a drop-off of children being told that they couldn't participate in these programming. And she really wanted to develop training to help support and grow the capacity of community members so that they could have autistic individuals in their programs, and so that we could grow that community capacity. And she's really the basis behind the training arm at CAN. This is the why. Participating in sport and recreation has the same benefits for autistic individuals as neurodivergent folks as neurotypical individuals. There's so much research evidence that physical activity and social connection and community connection might be even more beneficial for some of these populations who do experience loneliness and isolation because of their disability. Oftentimes sports and recreation talk a big talk about inclusion, but the reality is oftentimes neurodivergent individuals are excluded and folks just aren't ready to support neurodivergent individuals in their programs. The trainings that we have developed and lead at CAN teach easy to learn approaches that can be used right away to help and successfully include participants and support them in programs. Inclusion in sport and recreation can be really life-changing for families and caretakers and their children. Oftentimes, myself, anecdote in programs, I really do hear from family members that they never thought that they might get some opportunities to participate. And that CAN is one of the reasons that they have been able to go camping, for example, because we run actually like a camping program with Parks Canada, where we provide a supportive environment for folks to go camping. So since 2013, we've been offering our training workshops. Over 300 workshops have been delivered since 2013 to swimming instructors, skating instructors, day camps, and sports coaches across the province in Canada. We have a dedicated training team, myself included, offering in-person and virtual training and accessibility resources. So we're really lucky that on our training team, we have 4 full-time office staff and over 30 community-based learning facilitators across BC. This is touching in regions like Nanaimo, Victoria. We have a learning facilitator in Prince George, Fraser Valley, as well as Metro Vancouver, as well as we are able to offer those virtual trainings to help grow our reach beyond that. We've attended several sports conferences to build awareness on how to create inclusive sports spaces for individuals on the spectrum and other neurodivergent athletes. This is such as like the CAC Sport Leadership Conference and Sport for Life's annual national conference. And I think more recently, we have added our community engagement coordinator, who is really able to help create resources such as visual guides, front-loading documents, resource kits and sensory kits to help support autistic athletes and who are engaging in sport and help give those resources to community groups. So content-wise, our trainings always include an introduction to neurodiversity and inclusive language. There are a lot of misconceptions around autism, and the language is actually really rapidly changing. Can we take our clues from the community and we mirror the language that we are hearing from the autistic community? So this is getting away from deficit-based language and really focusing on strengths-based language in our approach. So our support strategies focus around communication, motivation, and increasing predictability. The goal is that we should be communicating in ways that is accessible to neurodiverse and specifically autistic individuals. Sometimes there is, with motivation, how can we help individuals who maybe this is a new experience and maybe it's very scary and it's outside of their predictability. So how can we bridge that gap to get them to participate, or try to motivate them to participate? And lastly, many autistic individuals really do thrive in highly predictable environments. So how can we build structure around our programming to help bridge that newness and that uncertainty of going into a totally new environment? And lastly, we do also cover the use of visual supports and adding more visual cues in programs to help support autistic athletes. The focus of our content is that you don't necessarily need to learn or label or know the diagnosis of someone. That's really not our focus. These strategies do help support many folks. And if you notice that these individuals may be supporting from different support strategies, that it is great to use those with anybody. We want to consider individual motivation, so really working with that individual to help them with their goals. And we want to really build step-by-step success for individuals. So what we've learned is workshops are a really great start. They're my bread and butter, that they are what I do day in and day out, but folks often do need that hands-on practice. So we then from the training have added more hands-on practice components, and we've developed what we call a training and try it concept. So training and try-its are hosted in 2 parts of training workshop, then a try-it event. These are 2 to 3 hour interactive training workshops that cover that training content that I previously spoke to. And then in the second part, we do a try-it event where coaches are working alongside children, youth, and adults on the spectrum, who are our members, who we bring to their sports, their organization. So we've done these with like Rowing BC, soccer clubs in Burnaby, just to name a few. And it's a really great opportunity where we bring our support workers to help support the individuals. But the idea is that we phase our staff out over time, so their group is taking the lead. By the end of the day, we should just be there in case the participant needs maybe has higher support needs. But the idea is that we phase out and the group really gets that hands-on experience where they get to apply what they've learned earlier in the day. We've done a few variations of this at our sports day, which is one of our marquee events. It's an opportunity for our participants to come to BC Place in Vancouver and try a variety of sports. What's really amazing is that participants get a taste of a sport that they maybe haven't tried before. Same with the try-it events. And the provincial sports organizations receive CAN training that then host a station at our sports day events. So this has been done with BC Lacrosse, BC Athletics, BC Rugby, and GOC BC. It's a very amazing event, and it's really, we just fill out BC Place and folks get to try these sports. And the idea is that these groups then have information about how the athletes can then access these services and sign up, and the folks have had training. So hopefully they then feel ready and able to support autistic athletes within their organization. So what we've learned is adding the opportunity to practice skills with coaches and feedback from CAN staff is really crucial to the success of our trainings. It really does support the learning of folks. Oftentimes we come in with training and we get a lot of questions and there's a lot of nerves from the groups that we are training. And I think about how do we implement this once you're gone? How do we do this? And I think having that hands-on approach where we are there to provide feedback, and there is that safety net of CAN being there really does help assuage some of the nerves from the organizations that we do work with. And the other added benefit is that CAN participants love the opportunity to be exposed to a range of sports. It's a really great opportunity to just try a sport, see if it might work for you, and then hopefully the groups then get to go in. The individuals can then go in and sign up. This past weekend, we actually did something very similar with a fitness studio in Vancouver. We did some yoga classes where we trained them, then our participants came in and did yoga. And what was amazing is that one of the individuals came up and told me that their father actually bought them a class pass for that yoga studio because they felt it's very supported in the environment, and they felt like this was a space that they could continue to be in after the program was finished. So along the way, we've also developed, we've realized that there's a lot of people across BC, Canada, and beyond who want this information. And this has actually led to an opportunity to offer several online modules with different organizations. These online modules are always in partnership with other organizations. We try to be very intentionally with the online modules we have built to ensure that they are getting to the appropriate audience. So in 2016, we were contacted by Special Olympics to build an online module focused on supporting individuals on the spectrum. 2017, we partnered with the BC Recreation and Parks Association to create autism awareness for community recreation leaders. I just want to note that there is some outdated language in that module, so we are working to update the language. Language is oftentimes a very fast-changing landscape, so we're doing our best to be up to date with that. And lastly, we partnered with Jumpstart, who is Canadian Tire's nonprofit to help create supporting positive behaviors, which is really focused on supporting athletes who may need support with engagement and really getting away from old school styles of coaching, which oftentimes does not work well for neurodivergent athletes and many other athletes in general. What we've learned from our online modules is that it's a great way to get introductory information out to a lot of people, but it does work best if it's paired either with a live workshop, virtual or in person, with an opportunity to practice those skills. There is a major benefit to people being able to ask questions, and with online modules, unfortunately, that isn't something that is always being able to be facilitated. Although I do always welcome questions coming to my inbox from folks, and oftentimes I do get that folks reaching out and asking follow-up questions from training and asking if they can get more training from us. Outside of the realm of rec and sport a little bit, but oftentimes we do see this with first responders who are accessing our first responder modules, then come to us and ask for training for their detachments. So what works best? I would say when it comes to creating inclusion for autistic individuals, long-term partnerships. And that is, I think, the best way. I think a lot of organizations think of it as a one and done type of model. We do this training for our staff. We have the autism training, we can go forward. But I think it does sometimes, there is a lot of turnover in organizations. So you may have some folks who have been at the training, some folks may be newer. Also, if we're not using these skills all the time, it is good to continue learning and practicing. So what we recommend is oftentimes starting with online training as that baseline, but then following up with a workshop, if that be in person or virtual, providing that opportunity for coaches and leaders to practice and ask those questions. And our trainings can be customized, which is really amazing. I work with groups who have very specific visions of what they want. So sometimes that's even creating trainings that have in-person split, basically like half in the classroom. Oftentimes this is with swim instructors and lifeguards, where then we move half to the pool and we practice those support strategies. If that be like using token boards or those motivations. Since oftentimes with pools, sometimes athletes don't want to get into the cold pool, or the pool is a very sensory rich environment, so there's a lot to actually wade through. And then lastly, if these groups can get involved with CAM programs, so they've done training, then maybe we can run a program with them, or they can come visit a program to see how we work. So that could be a sports day or hosting a triad event for our participants to come and try something new. So some examples of these long-term relationships are Jay's Care. They will become a major partner to creating community training content to use across the country and delivering Jay's Care's baseball programs across BC. And we have strong provincial sports organization partners, including the Golf BC, Rowing BC, and Tennis BC, who we've mentioned previously. Tennis BC right now is in the works for starting the process to organize a triad event with our participants. So looking forward to that as well. So we're just going to do a little bit of a community spotlight of how this can work in community. So this is just selected programs in Victoria over the last year. So we have partner organizations that we run these monthly programs with. So City of Victoria, my apologies. We run monthly skate programs. The Victoria Grizzlies donates tickets and runs an autism acceptance game with us. Embrace Arts summer programs, so it's adaptive dance and music, adult fitness, tennis programs, family experiences, visiting the Royal BC Museum, and then training workshops. So oftentimes it actually can go either one of two ways. Sometimes groups just reach out to me first for training, then they end up doing a partnered program, or sometimes they're doing the partnered programs and then they're like, training would be really great actually. And it's part of the process of doing these programs is them getting trained. So some challenges for inclusion that we've noticed. So barriers that neurodiverse athletes face in sport is, like I said previously, the sports and recreation world is often rarely prepared for autistic participants. A lot of groups have a big talk, but it's nothing is more frustrating for potential participants and their caregivers than hearing these statements of, oh, we accept anybody, but the reality is that their approaches are prepared. What I recommend is being as specific as possible about the supports that you do have for participants, and that specificity is really important because then families and caregivers and individuals can make the decision about if a program's right for them and if it would be a good fit. So I think something with, say, like sensory friendly hours. So this is becoming more popular in pool settings. I've had groups being like, come to me and say, how can we do this? Like, how can we want to make sure this is like the best it can be. And I love that. It's amazing that that's the intention. But sometimes things are out of our control. We can't, and people do experience sensory environments really differently. So the best thing you can do is just being as specific. Note your hours. Have the staff trained so they know what the sensory friendly hours are. It also should extend to any security staff. So say you're working at a facility. Sometimes it's not just the recreation staff. And then just listing the supports out and where they're located and how folks can access, say, a sensory friendly room if they need that. Advocate for resource investment. Neurodivergent athletes may require more volunteers and more training for coaches and leaders. Instead of equipment adaptations, generally for neurodivergent athletes, what they may need is additional human resources and lowering those coaching ratios. In our programs for children, we tend to do one-to-one supports it might not always, I know that might not always be doable for some folks. In our YA programs, we do lower support ratios, not as high as one-to-one, but we also want to allow extra time for encouragement and patience for athletes. So with neurodivergent athletes, sometimes they need that extra time to take in the information that you are sharing with them and processing that. This investment will, with adding more coaches and volunteers, hopefully will become rewarding for coaches to watch these athletes succeed under the right conditions. And training is available. At CAN, we offer a variety of in-person and virtual trainings, as well as online modules that is able to be customized for the needs of your organization. I touched on this further, but be very specific about the accommodations you provide. So that being have it available for caregivers and individuals to find that information about what your coaching ratios are. If you have sensory friendly kits available for athletes, what the sensory environment is of the space that you're in, and so forth. Lastly, just being mindful that many athletes and their caregivers are burnt out. Sadly, most will have experienced failure in attending programs, and this is oftentimes multiple experiences. This is all the more reason to be extremely clear about what you provide and have additional resources in place if you say you are willing and ready to welcome neurodiverse athletes. Finding that champion, it's sometimes really important to have that person that has that personal connection. Maybe they're on the spectrum themselves, they have an autistic family member. 1 in 6 children are diagnosed as autistic every year in British Columbia. Many more have ADHD, like myself, anxiety and other profiles that do create barriers for inclusion because folks aren't ready to having created spaces that are welcoming for those individuals. So find those folks who understand and who are really truly committed to investing in what it takes to include these athletes and teens and adults into incredible, and it's really amazing to do so. I think just we all learn so much from having diversity within our programs and seeing different points of view as well. And lastly, online training is a really amazing start. I think it's that baseline that can go a long way, but it might not always be sufficient. Without that opportunity to practice skills or ask questions and get more feedback, online training often isn't enough. I would recommend looking for local resources or reaching out to CAN for more help. So I know some of you are not just located in British Columbia. For our external trainings or our community trainings, we are able to lead trainings across Canada. And lastly, if you want more resources, I can also send this to OneAbility, so this could be sent out, but hopefully it being a QR code makes it very quick. You can just grab that screenshot and then maybe scan it later, but we have our training resources. So this is basically all of our community training. We also have tip sheets for coaches and blank templates of visual schedules, token boards, countdowns that you can then customize for your organization. We have our training and try it events. So if you want and you since learning about training triads, you want to run this with your organization, there's more information about that there. And then lastly, our free online modules, which we do have for sports and recreation leaders. We also have online modules about employment support for autistic employees, first responder trainings, and so forth as well. So thank you so much for having me. If we have any time for questions, I feel like they'll let me know. So, oh, thank you, Paige. Paige couldn't put the screenshot in the chat. She actually is our regional coordinator in Nanaimo. So thank you so much, Paige, for doing that.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Silken. And yeah, we do have a couple minutes for questions if folks have a few. We'll also make space for questions when we get into our panel discussion a little bit later. Anyone want to share a question in the chat or come off mute to do so? And while we're waiting for that, Silken, we will share an email after this session with links to the recording, survey, and then all of these links as well. Okay. Kirsty, we have a chat from Kirsty. Can you share the preferred terminology at this point within CAN?
Great question. Thank you. So CAN and what CAN's terminology that we use is generally identity first language. So that's language like autistic individual, she's autistic, they are autistic. This is vastly preferred by the community, and that's where we're really taking our lead from. Although that being said, some individuals have their own personal preferences about the terminology that they like to use. So I think it's, so if someone says, I'm an odd individual with autism, please mirror that language back to them. Or I am diagnosed with autism. We just recommend using the language that that individual uses, but on a community-wide identity first is typically what's preferred. And then also around like supports, the autistic community has been very vocal about how saying that someone is high or low functioning isn't great language. And this is really common in medical settings, and it's very pervasive. What we've been hearing is that using language like this person, framing around like their specific support needs instead of high or low functioning, because, well, it isn't a kind way to talk about a person, and it really does actually privilege spoken language. I think a lot of folks think if someone isn't speaking that they can't communicate, and I think there's a lot of there is a lot of assumptions made based on that, where folks can communicate in a lot of different ways, that be assistive technology, sign language, and it's very important to always presume competence. So with that, we have seen a shift towards saying this person has high support needs or low support needs. But what's better and the best is saying this person specifically needs support here, or this is a specific support strategy that really works for them. So this could look like this person needs support with transitions. There sometimes is difficulty transitioning away from a preferred activity to something that is not preferred. So we really need to support that transition. I hope that helps. That was a lot of language all at once, but thank you for that really great question around language.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Silken. Any other questions, folks? Okay, well, maybe on that, we'll hold the rest of the questions till we get to the panel. So we're going to take a quick little break. Thanks so much, Silken, for being on today and sharing the great work that CAN's been doing and continues to do both in education and in community programming. We're super grateful to have you as a partner of OneAbility, and most recently we hosted a session at the Victoria Royals game where we got to be kind of the featured entity, and brought a number of our members in, and it was really great to have CAN as part of that, because you were able to host some low sensory spaces and help educate the community around kind of thinking about and planning for how different folks experience some of those spaces that are a little more intense.
Yes.
So we greatly appreciated that.
Hockey, I think hockey arenas, especially like swimming pools, are just they're very sensory rich. So it's really great when we are able to come in and help support those spaces. So thank you so much, and I'll hand it back for that break now.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So yeah, we are going to head on a break. I'm going to pop up a slide. We're going to come back at 10:40, and we're going to hear from Special Olympics Canada, and then we're going to go into our panel. So looking forward to continuing our session with you today, and go grab a little bio break or snack or whatever will support you to continue to tune in for until noon today Pacific. Thanks so much. See you soon. Welcome back, folks. Hopefully you had a restful little break. We're going to move on with our program for today. So I want to just give you a moment to come back in. And then we're going to get started with our next presentation, which is from Special Olympics Canada. And we just want to recognize Special Olympics Canada has done incredible work, both in terms of delivery of programming for people with cognitive disabilities across Canada, and internationally, but also locally with some great programming options. And we're super grateful today to have them as part of this program. And to welcome Danielle Emmons, the program manager for Special Olympics Canada, in to join us today. Thank you so much for being with us, Danielle. And we're looking forward to hearing from you and learning more about how we can support people with cognitive disabilities in our programming.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea. All right, going to get this up and running here. Okay. How does that look? Like a normal PowerPoint? Perfect. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks again, Andrea, for the introduction. My name is Danielle Emmons. I'm a program manager in the sports department at Special Olympics Canada. We're really excited to be here today and be part of the Education Day. I'm just going to give you a quick intro on me. So my name is Danielle. I use she, her pronouns. Like I said, I'm a program manager. I'm still fairly new to the Special Olympics movement. Actually, this week I celebrated my 1-year anniversary at Special Olympics Canada. So it's been a very exciting year for me, coming from more generic sport and high performance-based sport to the Special Olympics movement. So learning every day and loving every minute of it. I'm a member of the board of directors of the Coaching Association of Canada. So my title is program manager. My main portfolios include coach education, officials, and volunteer development. And I've been working in the coach education space for about 5 or 6 years now. I have a background in, like I said, coach education, but also kinesiology. Okay, so just a quick overview of where we're going and what I'm hoping to share with you today. I'm going to take a little bit of a different direction in terms of giving you a bit of an overview of our education programs and who we offer them for in terms of our participants. And then really what I'd like to do is showcase 2 of our program streams. So our coach education, as well as some of the athlete education opportunities that we offer. And then we'll just chat about some of the successes that we've seen and some of the opportunities that we see going forward. Okay, so our education programs, our main audiences are these 4 groups here that you'll see on the screen. So coaches, athletes, volunteers, and officials. The Special Olympics movement is largely fueled and works the way that it does, largely because of our volunteer base. So just like a regular NSO, we do have provincial and territorial sport organizations who do have staff. However, a lot of our regionalized programs and regionalized operations work through the volunteer network. So volunteers are a critical population and piece of our education puzzle. When it comes to our education programs, we have a few main goals because people that come to Special Olympics programming don't necessarily have a background in working with those with intellectual disabilities. And so the primary goal when we first engage with a participant is to teach them about the different types of intellectual disability and what this means for them as a coach, as an official, as a volunteer working within the Special Olympics movement. We aim to provide skills to coach or officiate in Special Olympics sports. Some Special Olympics sports do have rules that are different than the generic sport. Largely what happens is Special Olympics International will work with the International Federation of the sport in order to adapt the rules to make them age, stage, context specific and appropriate for Special Olympics athletes. And then finally, to teach participants about the history of Special Olympics, who participates in our programs, and how to create safe and positive sport environments and experiences for the participants that they in turn will be working with. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how we deliver our programs. So when it comes to athletes, once an athlete transitions out of their participation in sport-specific programs, we really try to engage with them outside of the sport environment. And the main way that we do this is through our athlete leadership modules. And these are offered both in person and via virtual e-learning modules. And so really the goal of these programs, we're going to focus a little bit later specifically on these, is to teach athletes the skills that they need to go out into the world and work and engage and participate meaningfully in society, whether that's in sport, in their job, in their everyday life, whatever that looks like. And so it's really that aspect of athlete engagement is very important for us because yes, we are a foundation and yes, we are primarily a sport-focused organization, but we do know that our athletes engage in many different activities outside of sport. And so we do feel that it's important to equip them with the skills that they need in order to engage and live a full and meaningful life. When it comes to our coach education, I'm hoping a lot of you are familiar with the NCCP program. So that's the National Coaching Certification Program, delivered in partnership with our chapters, as well as through the CAC, the Coaching Association of Canada, and then ongoing education through professional development sessions. So the NCCP is delivered both in person and online via the synchronous learning environment, which means live, interactive on Zoom, just like we're doing here today. And then our PD education systems, our education sessions, are delivered in a variety of ways, typically via coach conference in person or through webinars. And so we're going to focus a little bit in a few minutes on the coach education programming and what that looks like both for coach education pathways as well as those professional development and lifelong learning sessions. In terms of volunteer education, our main course that we engage with volunteers when they first come into the movement is our volunteer orientation. And this was recently revamped, so I'm happy to share with Andrea and her team to then send on to everyone on the call today a link to our volunteer orientation, which really gives a wholesome introduction to the Special Olympics movement, what you can expect to experience when working with participants who have an intellectual disability, as well as some of the modifications to programs that you might need to make when engaging with this population, as well as the different types of roles. And so, like I said earlier, volunteers are critical to our movement. And so we do have sport volunteer roles. However, we also have roles for volunteers that you might typically think would be part or full-time staff. And so whether that's regional coordinators who are performing that role through volunteerism, or financial management, or record keeping, or registration volunteers, all of those different types of roles are critical to making sure that our programs can continue to run across all of our provinces and territories. And then our last group that I'd like to chat about is our officials. And so there's a variety of officials education courses. Typically, these are offered in person. Over the last year, we have launched a sport-specific one for floor hockey, which is a Special Olympics sport, via a virtual e-learning module. And so for us, when we talk about e-learning, we are talking about asynchronous learning in terms of an online module that you click through, you go through different activities, there's reading, there's videos, and it's very self-paced to achieve your learning outcomes. So let's talk a little bit about coach education more specifically. And so as part of the NCCP, we know that there are different streams. Sorry, I'm just reorganizing the way that I see all of you on my screen, so I can also see my speaking notes here. Perfect. Okay, so two streams in Special Olympics coach education pathways. We've got the community stream and the competition introduction stream. Within our community stream, we have two courses, coaching young athletes and community ongoing participation. Today, I'd just like to talk to you a little bit about our coaching young athletes course. And so this course specifically equips program leaders of the Active Start and Fundamentals programs with the skills to effectively teach Special Olympics athletes fundamental movement skills as they begin their journey in sport. And so coaching young athletes is really about engaging with athletes who are starting special programs as a first touch in maybe sport, maybe Special Olympics sports. And so typically this is, these coaches will work with athletes who are in that 4 to 8. And then when they get more in as part of active start, and then fundamentals is more in that 8 to 12 kind of range before some athletes will choose to move into more of a competitive stream. And so with our community coaching courses, it's very important for us to emphasize to our coaches that fundamental movement skills are going to be the key to then engaging in sport specific skills. And so we might think of run, jump, throw, wheel, all of those skills, and then how can they be transitioned into more sport specific programming. Then we get into our competition introduction. And so this is in the NCCP, the competition pathways is separate from the community pathway. And so in this course, really, we're introducing coaches to the different types of intellectual disability, providing them with the building blocks they need to coach athletes in a safe and positive sport environment while preparing for competition. And so just like you would take a competition introduction sport specific course, for example, we are teaching our coaches the skills that they need to prepare their athletes for competition. And so for both of these streams, what's really important is to remember that our coaches and volunteers are not necessarily the ones with intellectual disabilities, but they are the ones who are working with athletes who have ID. What's also unique about our coaching population is that we have, just like our athletes have a wide age range, our coaches have a very wide age range. And this might be from 16 all the way up to 75. And so this is certainly something that creates a unique learning and teaching environment, both from the perspective of the learning facilitator who's delivering the course, and also the experience of the participants in the course. Typically, we'll see some coaches who are coming to our coaching pathways for the first time, generally from generic sports. So they may have NCCP experience in another sport that they coach, and then they're coming to learn more about those with ID. And then you might have somebody as part of an older population who has maybe been volunteering for many, many years in or outside of sports, and is now coming to take more of that formal education pathway to engage with their athletes. And so for our learning facilitators, it's really important for them to be able to adapt the way that they're teaching the content to the age and stage of participants in their course, both from a content perspective, but also from a language and a technology perspective. And so language is also a really big piece that we continue to work through. And just like Silken said earlier, we're focused on their language in Canucks Autism Network is focused now a lot around identity first language. We've moved from person first language now to that identity first language identification. And so language is constantly evolving, especially in the special O space. And so it's really important for our facilitators to be able to keep up with that, and then to be able to adapt the language that they're using to the participants in their course. Excuse me. I also want to touch a little bit about how this education is beneficial for our audience. And so one of the things that is also unique about our coaches is that they're almost pursuing two coach education pathways at the same time. One that might be sport specific, and then one that is special O specific. And so the best way for me to explain it to you, and the way that I often explain it to those in sport, is that coaches take sport specific training to become familiar with the technical aspects of the sport they coach. So for example, in basketball, you take a basketball course to learn about offensive and defensive concepts, dribbling, passing, shooting, those technical skills of the game. Our coaches are coming to special O coach education to become familiar with the technical aspects of coaching athletes with an intellectual disability. And so you're coming to our course to learn about, okay, you're working with athletes that have Down syndrome. These are some of the characteristics of the athletes that you might see. Now let's talk about what that means for you as a coach, and what are the implications of coaching athletes with this disability in terms of a sport and physical activity context, and what does that look like for you? And so in all of our coach education courses, a key message is really, why do we care about this, and how does it affect my coaching? Because coaching a generic basketball athlete may not necessarily be the same as coaching an athlete in special O in basketball. So in addition to you've got that extra point there, in addition to our Special Olympics coach education, our coaches also participate in sports-specific NCCP training, which we really feel helps them to deliver programming effectively. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about our delivery methods for our coach education. So like I said earlier, we've got in-person delivery as well as synchronous online delivery via various online platforms. And so I think for a lot of sport organizations, in-person delivery was the main method of delivery pre-COVID. Then the world changed, we all pivoted, and a lot of sports very quickly tried to adapt our in-person courses to online delivery. And I think there's a lot of research that's coming out now through the Coaching Association of Canada, a lot of really great research findings around how coach education delivery has changed, its effectiveness, and we're still going to continue to see and examine the effects, both positive and negative, on the coach education experience for the coach directly, and then in turn for the athletes. And whether we look at that through certification rates, or whether we've achieved our learning outcomes as effectively online as we used to in person, those are all questions that we continue to answer when we analyze new delivery methods in coach education. And so what we've done is worked with each of our provincial and territorial chapters to determine what delivery method works well based on their coaching population. So for example, in Newfoundland, we know that their volunteer and coach population is a lot older than maybe what we're seeing in Ontario. And those volunteers are not necessarily comfortable working with technology. And so in Newfoundland, we know maybe in-person delivery is still going to remain the primary source of coach education. Whereas in somewhere like British Columbia, we know that a combination works really well. We know virtual is effective because there are a lot, just based on sheer population numbers, you've got a lot more courses that you need to deliver, but also we're able to reach more people in remote northern communities as well by being able to deliver our courses online. And reduce some of the previous costs that we might have had associated with delivering NCCP learning in terms of facility, travel, various expenses that way. Then we've got our professional development. And so when we talk about coach education, we've got the actual education itself, but then once you've done your training and once you've maybe done your certification, how do you continue to engage? And we really want to emphasize that idea of lifelong learning. And the way that we do that in coaching pathways is through professional development. And so for us, and I would say for many sports across the sector, we've got three main methods of delivery, and those are in person, so coaching conferences, professional development days, different things like that. Synchronous online delivery via webinars, and then asynchronous delivery modules, both in the locker, which is the CAC platform, as well as Special Olympics Canada has an online learning platform called SO Learn. And so since we've adapted our formal education pathways and our PD pathways, learning for coaches can be a lot more flexible. And so we're able to develop these creative e-learning modules that go deeper into more specific topics, such as, so some of the ones that we offer in the locker: coaching athletes with Down syndrome, diversity and inclusion in action. We've got a course on allyship, and then we have produced, in partnership with Canucks Autism, a module on supporting athletes with autism in a recreational setting. This course, likely over the next year, will be undergoing a significant revamp. So if you are interested in taking it now, definitely encourage you. There is some information. I will give you the caveat that the front end of the course is maybe a little bit outdated, specifically in terms of language and some of the research that's being used. And so we'll be working with Canucks Autism to revamp that module and bring the research and the language and the outcomes up to date there. But that's one of the main places you're going to find our professional development opportunities. And then in our own platform, SO Learn, we've got some education there for coaches. That's typically where we'll also host our e-learning for our officials. And then more information on athlete leadership modules as well, which we're going to talk about in a second here. So, like I said earlier, it's important for us to continue to engage our athletes outside of sport, and maybe when they are not necessarily participating in a competitive experience anymore. And so we typically offer two formal athlete leadership education sources. The first is an athlete representative course. And this typically prepares our athlete leaders to become members of committees and input councils within Special Olympics. And so as part of our sport department, we have a Canadian Athlete Leadership Council. And then typically each province and territory will have their own provincial and territorial athlete leadership council. And it's one of the sayings that we use a lot in Special O is nothing for us without us. And so for us, whenever we're creating our education modules that are going to be put out into the community, it's very important that our athletes have a say in whether it's the content, whether it's the way that the content is written and the language that is used, whether it's the way that it's delivered and the activities that are included in those learning modules and activities. It's important for us to engage with them on a regular basis. And so this course was developed by Special Olympics North America. And really its focus is on building those transferable skills that athletes can take to be part of committees and be in positions for decision making, and to really effectively give their input into programs that are running across their provinces and territories. The second one that I've got on here is our athlete leadership modules. And I've got a screenshot of, this is our SO Learn platform. So similar to where our volunteer orientation is housed. This is what our athletes page looks like. And I know it's probably small for you, but some of the courses and modules that you'll see on there for athletes are learning facilitator core training, community athlete representatives, fundraising 101, and then governance and athletes input on councils. And so those are just a few examples of the learning opportunities, which are designed to support them in a variety of areas beyond sport. So this is where they might come to develop tangible skills on public speaking, on skill development. We've got a course in development now in cybersecurity, so that when athletes with IED are engaging on the internet, they're a little bit more aware of ways that they can do that safely and effectively. And so the difference here, obviously you can tell from the title in terms of audience, is that these education modules are really designed for people with an intellectual disability. And so similar to how our volunteers and our coaches have a wide age range, so too do our athletes. And so a really good example is when we host our national team program, we've got young teenage athletes, and then we've got athletes that are 50 plus. And I think that is something that's really unique to the Special Olympics movement, is that athletes will stay in competitive programs for a lot longer. Our athletes also often participate in multiple sports, which is super beneficial for them. And it's a really great way for us to continue engaging with them in a variety of ways. And so a couple of things that we take into consideration when we're building our athlete leadership modules and our athlete education is the language that we use. And in this context, I'm not talking about whether we're identifying somebody based identity first language versus person first language. I'm talking about the actual language that you're using to convey the message and the learning outcome, and to make sure that it's level appropriate for them to be able to understand and achieve the learning outcomes that you want to for that course. And so, like I said earlier, when we develop our athlete leadership modules, we often review it with our Canadian Athlete Leadership Council to make sure that the language is understandable, that the activities are appropriate, and that they'll be able to engage effectively. Okay, so the last bit that I want to touch on here with you is our successes and our learnings for our education development. So you'll see here a lot of our successes are centered around adapting programs for multiple delivery methods, increased accessibility to courses with the addition of online delivery, a collaborative approach used to course design. And so whether that is consulting with our provinces and territories, consulting with our athletes, consulting with our learning facilitators who are engaging with coaches across the country, or with it, whether it's the coaches themselves who are delivering our programming. It's very important when we are taking on revisions or developing new courses to have input from all of those groups in order to build the most effective course. Because it's one thing for me to build a course sitting in the national office, but it's another thing for a coach to actually be on the ground working with the athletes themselves. We're going to have two totally different views on what that course should look like. Something else that's worked really well for us is having broad training outcomes, which create value for any and all coaches. And by this, what I mean is that, yes, we do talk about coaching athletes with an intellectual disability, but because our learning outcomes are quite broad, our course can certainly be appropriate for coaches working with athletes in generic sports. A lot of times we often see athletes who might have an intellectual disability participating in generic sport, and that can be for various reasons. Maybe they haven't been diagnosed, maybe they're culturally where they come from, it's not, their parents don't want them to have that label on them. Maybe they don't know that special ed programming is available. And so we do feel that it's important and valuable for coaches who are working in generic programs. They can also take little nuggets of knowledge from our courses as well. We are also working and have started to have success with the development of a coaching infrastructure to create national consistency. And so this is something that functions very well throughout the NCCP, and that's consistency in education delivery within sports across the country. And so the way that we really do that is by building an appropriate workforce of our learning facilitators, and then also an additional role that we call master coach developer. And the best way to think of those people is they teach the teachers. So they are the ones who are training the learning facilitators on how to deliver the course. And so we've recently started the process of coming together and building that master coach developer team, establishing our team values, and really working on how can we best equip our learning facilitators to go into communities, teach coaches our competition introduction and our coaching young athletes programs so that they can have the best experience, and then filter that down to the athletes that they're working with. And then finally, reflecting in and reflecting on the course as to why the outcomes are relevant to our coaches. And so another thing that we've been talking about recently when doing our course revisions is reflecting in versus reflecting on. And so what I mean here is reflection in is taking a minute when you're in the workshop or when you're in the building or revisions of a workshop to think about why you're implementing XYZ learning activities, why are the outcomes relevant to your coaches, versus reflecting on. And so we typically in coach education do a lot of reflecting on, especially with our learning facilitators after they've finished delivering the course, thinking about, oh, how did that go? And maybe that's part of your debriefing a few days later. And so what we're really trying to get into is this reflection in piece, where at the end of each module within our workshop, we're really thinking about, what does this mean for me as a coach? Let me think of my athletes. how does this information, how can I use this information to build more effective practices, to build more effective drills, to engage with my athletes in a more effective way so that they're getting more out of my program. Some of the learnings that we're seeing is, and I think this would be consistent across everyone who's trying to develop education materials, is determining the right amount of information to include in your training. And this is a question that we constantly ask ourselves, even when you're developing a simple webinar. How much is too much information versus what's just the bare minimum? What's the most effective amount of information that I can give so that coaches meet the learning outcomes, don't feel overwhelmed, and can take this information and effectively translate it to on court, on field, on ice programming for their athletes. We've chatted a lot about this, keeping up with language. I think it's really important when you work with athletes with intellectual disability and when you're thinking about language to be able to give yourself and give others the grace that you may make a mistake, and that's okay. And if you are corrected by an athlete or their caregiver in the way that that person identifies themselves or would like to be referred to, take the lead from them. It's really just about engaging with them in the way that they want to be engaged with. And I think for our coaches, a big message is it's okay to make a mistake. If someone corrects you, follow their lead and work with them. Revisions to course content. This is an ongoing cycle. And so we work through revisions to make sure that we're keeping up with the rules, the most up-to-date research, the most up-to-date language for each of our courses, whether that is our general competition introduction, our coaching young athletes, or any of our sport-specific courses. It's really important for all coach education courses across the NCCP, and we see this with our multi-sport modules as well, that they are updated so that we know as information changes, we're delivering the most up-to-date information to our coaches. Dealing with experienced coaches, this is a fun one. I think as the NCCP has transitioned out of the levels and into our new system and across all sports, dealing with coaches who have been around for quite a long time that don't necessarily understand or see the value in taking a formalized coach education pathway or workshop. And so really building a business case around why your education program is valuable, why they might need it, how it will help them be a better coach to better engage with their athletes, and finding out, doing all of that without discounting their experience, I think is really important. And then finally, a constant question of how much is too much to ask of volunteers. So just like we asked the question of how much is too much content to include, how many requirements are too many requirements to ask of our volunteers? And so I think as we move in the safe sports space forward, we're asking coaches to do a background check. We're asking them to do an orientation. We're asking them to do a formalized education workshop. We're asking them to maybe do some additional safe sport training. And so, yes, there are a lot of asks. And sometimes we who work in the sports sector and the education sector understand the meaning and the value of all of these. But again, bringing it back to that participant, how can we make sure that it's manageable for them, that they're not overwhelmed, and that if someone decides, oh, I'd like to give my time to volunteer with Special Olympics, the first thing they see is not a 20-item checklist of training and education requirements. And so really trying to navigate what are minimum standards, what are progressive standards that we can build, what are the really key pieces that we need our volunteers to have maybe before they start engaging versus pieces that they can collect along their volunteer journey. And so those are all pieces that we're working through in all of our education programs, and continuing to just make them better, more accessible, more effective, and give our athletes the best experience that they can in their sport program. And that's it for me. I'll pass back to you, Andrea.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Danielle. I've always had such incredible respect for how Special Olympics has created, I'm going to say, the spaces and the places for learning within the organization, within the work you're doing, and working to align with the various structures and systems that are part of our sports system that sometimes make it difficult to do that. So
Yes.
yeah, just great respect in terms of how Special O's navigated that and the amount of resources and tools that have been available in the Special Olympics system to help support that learning journey. So tremendous work. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm truly grateful to have you here today and to help facilitate that understanding of what does exist and where we can go to kind of connect some of these systems of learning together.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So I'll maybe just see if anyone has any direct questions for Danielle, and then we're gonna move into our panel where you'll also have an opportunity for questions for our 3 panelists.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, hi. I'm Greg Smith, and my question for Daniel is, I'm working with athletes with the intellectual disabilities and swimming. And when we teach them something, as soon as they get excited and get into a competition or something, they go back to originally how they were. Do you have coursework or anything where we can change some of the things we'd like them to change and get it cemented into the memory bank, shall we say?
That's a really good question. And I think, Greg, that a lot of coaches have that same experience, both in Special O sport and in generic sport as well. Particularly when you have athletes who are maybe in that learn to train or train to train stage of athlete development. I think part of it is accepting as a coach that you know that you might have to repeat some activities. And one of the things that we talk about in our courses is that sometimes even from season to season, you might see that athletes have potentially regressed or forgotten even their fundamental movement skills. And so I think really the best way to go about that is to think about your practice planning and to realize and remember that you might need to spend more time on a skill or revisit a skill multiple times. And how can we effectively distribute that practice across multiple sessions so that they're not just focusing maybe one stroke in this practice, one stroke in another practice? How can we incorporate that specific skill that they're forgetting across multiple training sessions?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll try that. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks for the question, Greg. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to invite our 2 other panelists to join us then. So we have Geneva coming back in, and we also have Silken coming back in. So just give me a sec to pin them on our screen. Okay, well, welcome. Thanks to the 3 of you, plus Sierra, who's in the background, for those great presentations today. And I think we're getting lots of direct message comments or texts saying that folks are really appreciating the knowledge sharing. So we're going to dive into that a little bit more through this panel discussion, and just kind of invite you to think about sort of how we're connecting some of this as we go forward. So I'd love to begin with the question around what role do education programs play in our communities? And maybe Danielle, since you've just stepped off the podium, you can come back up and kick us off with that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. The role of, remind me again, sorry, just repeat.
That's okay. Maybe I should start with you last to give you a little bit of breathing room. What role do education programs play in our communities? So kind of thinking about sort of as we're bringing all these pieces together and particularly trying to support our disability community to have quality sport and physical activity experiences, what role does that play?
Yes, absolutely. I think that what I would say is, especially when you are working with populations of differing abilities, whether that's an intellectual disability or a physical disability, it's a little bit more specialized knowledge. It's a little bit more difficult for a coach or a volunteer to jump right into that program and to be able to figure it out as they go. And so I think it's very important for those volunteers and those coaches and those participants to have some sort of training and education resource so that they can at least have a minimum baseline to be able to understand how to effectively work with athletes that maybe have a disability, whatever type that may be. So I'm going to keep it short and sweet on the first one.
Perfect. Geneva, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah. I think in terms of like those education programs, like knowing that they exist actually is just a huge starting point.
Yeah.
But also just even when they do exist, I think with parasport and just generally, there's so much that is very niche knowledge. And so even if you are running an education program that's very specific to like Human Parity is more around coaching, it's not going to fit in every situation. And so even if those trainings exist, they're still not always quite right. And so just, I don't know, continuing to evolve them so that they can fit a broader audience at times and be a bit more narrow at other times, just to actually fit those needs that are coming up.
Awesome. Thank you. So Kim, let's go to you.
Yeah, so in the session, I covered the different modalities that CAN offers with the online modules, live training, as well as the training and tryouts. I also think with access to education is I like to think about it as this toolbox that you are learning all these skills, and they often might not, like, you're building this toolbox that you can pull out these tools when you need them, but like the other side, you may need to adapt on the fly depending on the participant's personal strengths. Oh, my cat has entered my desk, a little surprisingly. But thinking around like how can you best support that individual and being very adaptive on the fly. And I think also thinking around like what that individual's goals are. So we might have a big focus as coaches that this participant needs to do this specific thing in this competition, but the goals of the caregiver and the participant might just be to show up and have fun and learn a skill. So I think that's very important to the education is thinking about also the goals of the individual and not necessarily the path that we think they should be on.
Lovely. Yeah, thanks for that. I think that's such an opportunity to sort of check our own assumptions around why folks are there or what they need out of the program and how we set them up for success. So thinking about an education journey as folks are trying to support themselves to maybe have the skills, tools, resources to deliver quality programs in our communities, how do organizations access some of these tools and supports? What does that look like in terms of, for each of you, the types of programming you're offering? How do people know about them? How do they access them? And what do they kind of need to be thinking about to get started? So maybe we'll go Geneva first. I'm going to rotate who goes first, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think with some of our education initiatives, it's tricky to actually get them out there. And so I think we are, with the Human Care Ready, we are growing kind of constantly. And so we were doing those introduction sessions just as a kind of a way to get as broad of an audience as possible, and doing presentations for groups like this also is really beneficial. I know with even some of the work we've done with Whitewater Association here in Alberta, one of them organization individuals had joined one of the intro sessions, and then afterwards we'd emailed some and they were interested in basically bringing in me or someone else in the organization to speak with a group of their coaches and just actually answer questions, because their coaches had questions that even though that individual had done the session, still can't fully answer. And so Sierra actually was the one that wanted to join the session, and it was great because having an individual with lived experience to just support in a sport that it's a new sport too. Like, I've never done whitewater. Like, it's just kind of an interesting consideration. And so I think also just with different ways that we are trying to connect is like we have different modalities that the resource is available. And so we're doing those introduction sessions. We have workshops. We're trying to sportify the document. But also just we have the document as a written form on our website. And so just that it's available in as many options as possible. And if someone has a different option that would work really well for them, we're open to ideas and willing to work with people.
Yeah, thanks for that, giving those a variety of different entry points. Silken, I'm going to go to you next because I feel like you also spoke about that a bit in your presentation. So maybe that's a good place to dovetail into.
Yes, really similar to what Geneva was saying is that we do have different access points. Our website is probably the best place to come and see what we offer. And when it comes to setting up a training or a training and try it or accessing any of our like resources that we do create at CAN for folks, we typically always start with meetings. So we like to make ourselves available to individuals. That's a really large part of my job is meeting with folks, hearing what they need, what their staff needs, and making sure that they're getting the specific resources that we have, as well as that ability to customize content. I really love that I am able to do that in my role, and some groups have reached out for training. Like for example, Arts Umbrella they do dance and theater, and we did a training session, and they said, "Oh, our staff has all these scenarios that are common to them. Can we just do a session where we focus on those scenarios?" So that's something I am able to create for them and really customize. But with that being said, we do have the online modules, the tip sheets on our website. They're all under the training tab, and I did send those out to OneAbility to share after the presentation. But as well as my email. So if anyone wants to reach out to specifically inquire, I really do love taking those meetings and talking to people and really hearing about what they need and making sure they're getting those resources.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Danielle?
Yeah, I agree with all of the points that have been said. And I think part of the challenge can sometimes be the accessibility of the resource, and depending on the different type of resource that it is. And so, for example, you might only get a coach reference material if you take the coaching workshop. And there are definitely certain reasons for that, whether it's copyright or other, what that looks like. But I think also to kind of alleviate that is a little bit of different types of resources and their accessibility across, whether it's your website, whether it's through an e-learning module, or whether it's through a specific workshop that you are registering for and taking. And so also building those different resources into, if you're offering an e-learning module, providing links or documents or templates at the end and throughout, so that people can take those resources back with them and continue to use them in whatever way they're engaging with their population. Another piece around accessibility that we are talking about is the format of the resource. And so, for example, we've recently brought on a health manager, and we're really in Special O, we have a program called Healthy Athletes. And we've got different health messenger programs, which kind of aligns with using athlete leaders to promote health programs amongst their teammates. And so what's the best resource that we can provide to a coach who wants to deliver health programming at a practice? Is it flip cards on a little key ring? Is it a PDF document? Is it adding something into their coach reference material? So having a variety of resources in a variety of places for folks so that they can access them in the best way that they need them.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think when we think about some of the barriers to accessing materials and educational opportunities, like one of it is, knowing what exists out there. So part of bringing you folks together today was to help to share some of that out. But I feel like that's sort of always a starting point in these conversations. It's like, well, I don't even know what's there. So how do we start to share about each other's programs and services and educational opportunities as well, so that it's, yes, and because there is so many great resources out there and this opportunity to connect people to those. So, and I appreciate that each of you shared kind of different ways to access some of those resources as well. What do you think some of the barriers are to education that we see coming up with some of the sport organizations and community organizations, and how can we overcome some of those as we move forward? And I'll start with Silken.
Thank you. And like I said before, like oftentimes sport and rec organizations, the programming isn't built in a way that works for neurodivergent participants. Oftentimes I think there's that sticking point for coaches where participants who have trouble paying attention and staying engaged, as well as staying regulated, those participants often quit, and their families often have a lot of burnout and don't try again. So I think sometimes those barriers like really do show up in every step of the process. I think if we feel about programs, I think a great place to start is providing the information around the supports that are available. We advocate for organizations to be like very transparent and share what they've done to prepare for neurodiverse participants and their families. Like, can the family or caregivers bring a support person to the program? Have the coaches received any extra training? Are there additional volunteers available for the participant? And then I also think like asking the family what supports their children need. And this can be for all participants, not just neurodiverse children. I think this is a really great opportunity to have that at the point of registration, to ask questions about supports. What supports do your child need, or are there any ways that we can best support your child in our program? And just really focusing around the supports. You don't need to know a participant's diagnosis to ask about what supports, because we all have supports in our lives. For example, I find a lot of supports that are really great for autistic individuals. I use them in my day-to-day. I have a little whiteboard on my desk that I create checklists for myself. And then when neurodiverse children or participants enter that program, it's often immediately apparent when a leader or coach has that one way of coaching. I think that maybe old school or just it's really not catered to neurodiverse individuals. So really long verbal instructions instead of being really concise. Not that much time for waiting. So if the sensory environment's really rich, folks might need extra time to process the information. And then punishment approaches instead of noticing and praising those positive steps. Because I think a lot of folks, they really do want to know what they're doing well, and then will seek to continue doing it if they get that affirmation that they are participating in the way that's desired. Sorry, that was very long-winded.
No, that was great. I think you really spoke to some of the barriers that participants are facing in programming. And I think that was kind of my introduction actually to CAN, was that through some of the work we were doing in OneAbility, we were hearing about families that, would go to register their child in a program and either were told for a neurodivergent or child on the autism spectrum that they couldn't accommodate, the community program couldn't accommodate that child because they didn't have the supports they needed to do that. Or the parents wouldn't disclose, the child would show up, and then it wasn't a great experience for either the child or the leaders. So that was sort of my introduction to CAN, was like, okay, we need to figure out how we do better to support kids on the autism spectrum to be part of these programs, because 1 in 6 children, like that's a pretty big ratio of kids that need those types of supports. And to your earlier point, many of the supports that CAN's putting in place are actually really supportive for all kids and all participants. So I think that's also been a rich learning. Thank you.
If I could piggyback off that like a little bit, I think really what Danielle was saying, as well as with the barriers to, like, I think your coaching staff and your volunteers not having a million steps in place, also the same is really true for neurodiverse participants. Outside of CAN, I work for a comedy nonprofit, and that's something that we had to really work with our registration process. And we do hear that with groups when, and I think sometimes it's just being available to help folks with that process, but also like simplify. That's something I make myself available for my staff. I have a team of folks who are neurodivergent and neurotypical. Sometimes when I send out a form, I always make sure to say, I'm available if you need any support filling out this form, and I will hop on Zoom calls and help folks. So I think there's that balance of sometimes I need to simplify things to make sure they're very accessible, but also then being personally available to folks as well. And that is a big time. I think a lot of nonprofit sports orgs, it can be really difficult to dedicate that time, but it is sometimes really crucial. Anyway, I'll pass it on to the next person.
Danielle, do you want to add on to that question?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think of I mean, I think we all know about the different barriers in terms of we still have northern communities that don't have access to internet to even be able to participate online, or we know like sport participation is not always affordable for participants. But I really wanted to think of when it comes to building and delivering our education programs, some of the barriers that our sport organizations in particular might face. And I think a big one for that is workforce. And workforce meaning in terms of facilitators who are able to deliver the course. And I think some jurisdictions have that issue a lot more than others. Ontario, for example, is a really good one in that just sheer numbers of population of coaches and volunteers and participants in Ontario is different than the number of participants in, for example, Prince Edward Island or either of the territories. And so really ensuring that organizations are clear on the pathway for facilitators, the education pathway for facilitators, but also working with other organizations, whether it's a provincial sport organization and a national sport organization, or like managing their facilitator workforce across their different programs, just as an example, ensuring that everybody has a sufficient workforce in order to be able to deliver to their population. And I definitely think that virtual has helped in that now we are not necessarily restricted to just delivering a course in Manitoba or just delivering a course in Yukon. We can get coaches and volunteers from different provinces and territories all in the same room, which certainly helps with that resource sharing and that strategizing in terms of effective strategies for coaching and working with athletes and participants with disabilities and differing abilities. But it is certainly something that I think the sports sector struggles with, and making sure that the workforce is representative of the people that they are working with. That whole idea of you can't be what you can't see. And we are having in the coaching world where we've had the conversations about coaching athletes with a disability. And now we're starting to open the door around, well, what does it look like when you have a coach developer or a learning facilitator who has a disability? And how can we engage those people to continue to deliver our education program so that our athletes and our participants can see people that look like them effectively delivering education modules and know that that is an option and an opportunity that they could pursue if they wish to. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Geneva, do you want to add to that?
Sure. I think time commitment's a big barrier. Just like with nonprofit and sport, everyone's wearing a lot of different hats. And so when you're in a volunteer role as a coach or in different places, then actually committing time to do education when you already have a full-time job, you have a family, you have all of these different pieces that you're balancing. I think that time is it's hard to figure out how to manage it. And I don't really know what the solution is on that. I think just everyone is wearing a lot of hats. Yeah, I think that's the kind of one I'd speak to most beyond what's already been said.
Super. We had a question from the audience. How can we balance including participant input, voice, and consultation in development of training and resources with the added labor we are asking of our participants? So Danielle, can I lead with you?
Sure, absolutely. This is a really good question. For us, I would say we, through our athlete leadership councils, which are certainly volunteer based, that's how we effectively lean on our athletes for their input. And like I said at the start, our movement is very heavily volunteer based. And so we are constantly evaluating how much is too much to ask of our volunteers, and making sure that when we are going to our athletes and asking for their input, being very conscious of their time and their ability to give input, and maybe loosening some expectations around what our timelines are and what other people might need in order to get back to us and what we're asking of them. I think it's a very fine line, and we're particularly seeing this now that we're engaging a lot of survivors of sport, whether it's of abuse, harassment, maltreatment. We're starting to get into this idea of we can't ask those people to participate and give their input without paying them or whatever compensating them in a way that works for them. And I think it's a very fine line, and finding a balance of what roles can we use volunteers for and what roles do we actually need to engage in and with people who need to be compensated. So I definitely don't have an answer. It's something that we are trying to figure out always, and I think all sports across the sports sector try to figure that out, particularly because sport in Canada is largely volunteer based. We are not the states where our coaches and our sports staff are paid, and so it's a completely different model up here that everyone's trying to navigate.
Super for that great answer, Danielle. Geneva, do you want to go next?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of the very similar points to Danielle's. I know one thing we're doing at the Studward Center is that we just started is we have a youth advisory committee that just started that just is potentially participants of the Studward Center, but also just individuals experiencing disability that are in that age group, to engage with them and learn more about what they need from us and to actually provide programs for them, because it's a bit of a missed zone for us currently. And part of that is just leaning on, especially the fact that we're at the University of Alberta, and so that's a population that we want to be working with and to be known to. And I think just, yeah, actually working on that compensation piece, that when we are asking participants to talk to students that are interested potentially in those other pieces, and just using monetary compensation as a way to actually recognize to them that their lived experience has value. And so it's still just kind of figuring out how that all looks, but I think just making sure that that is always considered.
Awesome. So how about you?
Yes, I think really echoing what Danielle and Geneva was saying is, I think a big priority is when we engage self-advocates, is treating them, well, the fact is they are experts in their disability, and compensating them appropriately. I think this can be a barrier for nonprofit organizations. So oftentimes it's just, for me, it's really looking at my budget and seeing what I can engage with. But then also seeing there are a wealth of resources out there, if that be looking at blogs and podcasts and engaging with autistic voices that way, as well as like looking to academia, really being multimodal in our approach, and sometimes like even turning to things like Reddit, like when it comes to language, looking at spaces where this is at the forefront, and then sometimes it does take academia some time to catch up to what's happening on the forefront with folks. But the focus is, for me, very much compensating folks for their time, their expertise, and their consultation. It's really important. And I've had staff who've come to me and say like, oh, I have these recommendations. Like, I'd really love to schedule time to meet with you. And I'm like, okay, this is lovely. please let me, I want to make sure you're paid for this time. So like, I'm just gonna take my time to make sure I can pay you. And being very clear. And I think also just being very upfront about those exchanges and what we can offer, because they are experts. I think treating them as such is really important.
Awesome. Our next question is, what is a step forward that organizations can start with to increase access or awareness to educational resources, training resources, supports? So, Anna, Silken, can I stay on you for that one?
Yes. Do you mind just repeating? I was just reading Karina's question in the chat.
Oh, sorry, I hadn't seen Karina's comment yet. We'll come back to that one in a sec, if that's okay. What's a step forward that organizations can start with to increase access or awareness to training, education resources?
I think for CAN, part of our approach is making sure that we are participating in events like this. I think for us, we're also like updating our website, so it's really easy to navigate. I think sometimes design and accessibility do go hand in hand, and we've been looking at our website and saying like, whoa, this might be really hard to navigate for some neurodivergent folks, to make sure that there are multiple pathways for folks to access information. I think also making sure that there's an ongoing commitment to education on the side of the organizations. That I think some groups have that like one and done. Sometimes it's that one and done, but making sure there's an ongoing commitment. So it might not always need to be autism training, but having different modes. So having that plan of what would best work for your group. I think for me, part of it is also being very available to folks. I think some folks really like want to keep interactions online, and for me, it's meeting folks where they're at. Some folks want to ask all the questions and have everything to note. Some folks really do benefit from me specifically meeting with them and sharing the information, and then also having that avenue on our website available, and then making sure CAN's presence is very known within the community.
Danielle, do you want to go next?
Yeah, Silken started us off strong. I also think it's just like very like having an accessible website, simple things like having a social media presence. We know that that's how the younger generation and how a lot of volunteers like to engage, and understanding the population that you're working with, I think will help guide the ways in which you promote and get your resources out there. And then continuing to show up at events like these and continuing to foster partnerships across the sport sector. So it's like, even for example, I thought Becoming Para Ready was an Athletics Canada specific piece, and now I know that it's actually not. And so now I might go and access that tool to see how my coaches can use it in the event that they encounter an athlete that has an ID as well as a physical disability. And so it's events like these. It's really simple. That's all it is. The simple steps. We don't need to overcomplicate it.
Awesome. That felt like a great hand to Geneva in terms of like, let's connect some of these resources. How do we all use them together?
I think from an organizational side, just really leaning into opportunities for growth with that education piece. I know that for some different organizations that I've coached for, I'm usually approaching the board or different pieces and being like, hey, I really want to do this course. I think it would help me, versus them approaching me and saying, hey, we know we can support you. And so I think as an organization, bringing that to your volunteers and your staff, and your like sometimes your athletes too, that it's just like, hey, we think that this is a good opportunity, and if someone doesn't want to do it, they don't have to, but just knowing that they have the support of the organization and the opportunity, because sometimes they bring in someone to actually do the presentation for a group versus registering to do an education piece separately. So I think really just the push from organizations goes a long way.
Yeah, that prioritization and sort of a learning mindset, growth mindset culture within the organization to support folks to continue to learn. I will do a shout out to Special Olympics BC because they've certainly been engaged with us both through OneAbility and through some other work that I do, just asking for kind of ongoing supports for their volunteers. And I really appreciate that opportunity to continue to think about like, what are some of those topic areas that we know are gaps that we can help support. So I'm going to go to Karina's question in the chat. Is there best practices around advertising for inviting folks with lived experiences to be involved in consultation and training facilitation, and any honorarium recommendations? Who would like to lead on that one?
I'm happy to start if that's okay. I think oftentimes looking inward in your organization, also, I see you're from Power Capri. We work with you for the Learn to Camp events. It's lovely to see you here as well. Looking internally in your organization can be a really great place. I think with 1 in 29 children, there's many being diagnosed as autistic. There are many more adults who are not diagnosed. So there's a high likelihood that you do have those champions or folks who do have a personal experience in your organization. So that can be a great place to start, and then having that sometimes in person who's in that community who knows the best way to reach out or where to reach out. I think again, we want to be mindful that we're not adding too much onto their plate if they're in another role, but really seeing. But I think having that insider or that champion can oftentimes really be that really great way to start reaching out. Sometimes that can be like a call to action on social, or like that call on social media. Maybe it's tapping folks for additional leadership opportunities inside your own organization. That's something that I do quite a bit with my learning facilitator staff, with the self-advocates, and that I will reach out and ask them if they would like to be engaged in an additional paid opportunity to consult or to film specific videos for our staff. So something we did was that we were hearing a lot of feedback from our autistic staff that, hey, we really want to make sure folks are using the appropriate language. We've noticed a lot of language that the specific example was addressing a room like everyone's neurotypical. And they spoke to them. That was something they filmed, they brought to us, they filmed, and we paid them to do that internally. And I think around pay, that can be tricky, but I think sometimes it's just being really upfront with what you can afford, and then looking at comparable consulting rates. So for looking at what that can be. So we just tell this is the rate we can pay. Please let us know if there's any concerns. And then for CAN, we've looked at what the living wage is in Vancouver, and I think for us, oftentimes that's looking around $55 to $75 an hour for consulting. So making sure it is quite competitive, and really is placing that focus on this is, you are an expert, and making sure they're paid like they are. But if that's out of your budget, just being really upfront about what you can pay them, so that they can choose to then sign up for that opportunity, or say, actually, that's not something I can accept. So I think just sometimes that clarity and being specific is really important.
Awesome. Thanks. That's helpful. Great answer. Geneva, can I tap you to go next?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so Sierra just threw a link in the chat just for the Youth Advisory Committee that we have, or the Young Adult Advisory Committee. I'm doing that wrong. But with that, I think in terms of actually bringing people in, a large part of that was just doing an open call to our members currently, but then also through our social media, trying to get it broader, so getting shared by other organizations in Edmonton. Just because not everyone that's in the committee currently is actually even a Stedward participant at the moment. So I think that's a big piece of it. And then I think from that compensation piece, not necessarily honorarium, but just one of the pieces that we've done is that when they have their meetings in our offices, then afterwards they get, I can't remember if it's an hour or 2 hours, but basically exclusive access to our gym space. Because it's on a weekend, no one else is around, so they can use the equipment, they can do what they want, they can work out, but just that our gym is accessible and that they have that use as they choose. And then kind of it gives them an idea of what they can work towards as that committee, of knowing what the space is, so that what's useful in terms of programming to bring more young adults into the center.
Awesome. Thank you. Those are some great shares. Danielle.
Similar kind of to what Silken said around looking internally. I think for us, what's really effective is going through our provincial and territorial chapters to have them help us identify who future leaders can be, who would be a good fit for whatever the council is that we're looking for, or where we're looking to get input. And typically we'll see a lot of open calls, whether it's through social media or through newsletters, or even just information sharing at the program level. I think engaging the people that are in your circle already to mentor and identify and think broadly within the communities that they're working with, of who is the next gen of learning facilitator, of athlete advisor, or whatever role it is that you're looking to fill. It has been an effective way for us to continue succession planning for some of those roles. And the honorarium piece, so it's complicated, especially when you're in sport and not for profit. And like Silken said, I think it really is about being upfront about what you can afford. I think a lot of times, because people often know that many sport organizations are not for profit, they're more willing to give their time. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't be compensated in a variety of ways. And I think Geneva also had some really good ideas around creative ways to compensate for input. And I think those can be certainly effective.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much. I deeply appreciate those insights that this panel shared with us today, and your presentations to help kind of build our awareness and understanding of the tremendous educational and training resources that each of your organizations are offering. And I'm going to move us into wrap up. So thank you to our incredible presenters, Silken, Geneva, Danielle, and Sierra, for being part of today. Just deeply appreciate your partnership as part of our OneAbility community and the opportunity to hear from each of you and to share this forward. We're going to move into a wrap up, as I said. So I want to again acknowledge our kind of primary funding partner, which is the Victoria Foundation, who has been along this journey with us for about 9 years now. And also to the OneAbility members who continue to contribute to just the beautiful things that are happening across our community and all this good work. And for each of you who joined us today to be part of this community. I want to acknowledge as well our ASL interpreters, because without you, we wouldn't be able to share all of the incredible learnings of today. I'm just going to share a couple of takeaways from today with you each as we go to wrap up. So I think the takeaways that really resonated with me is there's so much great work happening across this community and so many great resources to tap into. So as you're encountering a gap or something that you're trying to navigate, being able to reach out and connect with the OneAbility community or other networks and community hubs across the country, I think is a really great chance to think about what does exist and to explore those resources together. Partnerships, it's literally what we've built the success of OneAbility on, but they are really key to navigating some of these harder questions and to helping support how we learn and support learning across our organizations together. That theme of nothing about us without us. How are we engaging folks with lived experience in our training and education opportunities, in our program delivery, in informing what's needed is a key learning. And language, our times are constantly changing. So thinking about how people want to be identified, how we support people, how we support ourselves to understand that so that we can make sure people feel welcomed, included, and supported in our organizations. So we are going to send out a survey. We'll also send a summary of all of the resources we heard about today, and we will send a copy of the recording. So all of those pieces will be coming your way over the next 24 hours or so. Just depends how long it takes to download all of this good stuff. And I want to acknowledge again the OneAbility Foundation board for the tremendous support that they've given us in these first 2 years of being a charity. And Karina's on today, so again, an acknowledgement to Karina as our board chair for your tremendous leadership. And to Alec Nelson, who opened us today but couldn't stay to close us because he's an important event. And to Samantha Heron, who really was behind the scenes supporting, organizing all of today and is on a flight, so couldn't actually join us today. And to Sierra Roth for helping promote this and being part of our tech support as well as presenting today. So just super grateful for this team and for the community that we're building around OneAbility. And that's it. We are wrapping up for today. And thank you all so much for being part of the OneAbility Annual Education Day. And we'll see you next year, if not before.